So if you'd like to get more of what you actually want, keep watching because I have a perspective to offer you. Now, if you write down whatever it is that you imagine you want, whether it's a new car or a new place to live or a romantic partner, you will find that in fact, what you're really looking for is the feeling that you imagine you're going to have inside when you have that thing. And so, what I want to share with you is that you actually have all the chemicals that produce that feeling already in your brain. And that it is through your perception of things that you are releasing those chemicals. And so, a lot of what it is that I offer and through these videos and through my classes is perspectives that allow us to understand our world differently and have more access to happiness, because that's what we really want. We really want the feeling of happiness that we imagine we're going to have when we acquire or achieve whatever it is that we're looking to do. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't also look to do things, have goals, set them, accomplish them, feel the fulfillment from that. There's a level of self-respect which you just can't get without willingly accepting a challenge and overcoming it. There's just a certain experience that gives you as a human, and it's valuable. But what can happen is if you get caught in a kind of a loop of that and you're just looking for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, you can come to find that you're just in this state of kind of perpetual lack or deprivation. And even though you might have accumulated a lot of success, somehow you still feel empty inside. So the other half of that picture is that it just as necessary is having an attitude or a perspective that allows you to be happy regardless of any accomplishment. So one of those things that I'll share with you is about judgment and discernment, and the difference between those two things and how it is that leads us to more happiness in our life. It goes like this. So in essence, when you judge a person, it means essentially, in the definitions that I'm using, that you look at them as being a certain way and you say that that's either good and right or bad and wrong. Whereas discernment is another term which refers to that sort of ability to divide or to categorize things, but without necessarily saying that this is good and right and that is bad and wrong. And the reason why I bring up this difference in definition is because it's at the core of what keeps a lot of people unhappy, or on the flip side, releases a lot of people to be happy and joyous, regardless of what's going on. It works like this. If you recognize the essential truth that everyone is exactly the same in a certain way, that way being one, they were born with certain qualities and characteristics. I've asked all kinds of mothers, I have my own child, I know that right out of the womb, they're different than other children. There's just some that are more active and more loud and others that are more quiet and receptive. And so we're all born with certain qualities or characteristics. You might call that our genetic potential being, in a certain range or a different range, right? So being born with different qualities and characteristics, our environment, whatever it is, responds to us, and we learn to express those qualities and characteristics or not express them because we're either rewarded by our environment for doing so or otherwise. And so we're all born with qualities and characteristics. We're all taught by our environment to express them or not in certain ways. And in psychology, they refer to that as nature versus nurture, that the person's personality is based both on this certain innate nature and their nature and natural evolution. And then the other aspect of the personality is developed through nurture, or how the world responds to and either supports or suppresses the expression of those characteristics. So those are two things in which we're all the same. We have these characteristics, we're taught to express them or not in certain ways. And the third thing that's the same about all of us is that we all are doing the thing that we think is the right thing to do, or else we wouldn't be doing it. And the truth is that if you were born as whatever other person you're looking at, and you had exactly the same experiences that they had, you would be doing what it is that they're doing. So every human being, regardless of how benevolent and beatific or kind and compassionate and generous, or how wicked and evil, the person is acting, they're just doing the thing that they think is the right thing to do. They think that's the thing that's going to get them to what it is that they want to get to, which is this feeling that I talked about earlier, this happiness that we're all looking for. So if you recognize that context, that everybody is in the same situation, it's a little bit easier to have discernment rather than judgment for people. Because usually, people will tend to look up at a person, and if they don't like the way they're behaving, they're like, oh, that's a bad person, or that's a wrong person, or I don't like them, and if it'd just be better if they were wiped off the planet or whatever, right? And that whole perspective, what it does is it creates an atmosphere of judgment in our heads. And what ends up happening is inevitably and eventually, we end up in a circumstance where we ourselves act in some way which is not maybe in accordance with what it is that we ultimately would think humans should be and do. And so if you have a huge atmosphere of judgment in your mind, when you see yourself, or you are faced perhaps by another with this circumstance where you've acted in these ways which are not in alignment, then the tendency is for us to get really nervous and be like, well, I don't want to define myself as being bad or wrong. So there tends to be this motivation to either deny that you did it in the first place, whatever it is that you did that is not in accordance with your values as you state them, or you can rationalize. You can say, oh yeah, I did that, but I did it for a good reason. I did it for this reason over here, that reason, and it's excusable. Whereas if other people did it, well, that would be terrible. And so those two things, denial or rationalization, can basically be in the way of us learning a lesson about what it is that is going on for us in our lives. And when we have that natural feeling of cognitive dissonance, is what it's called in psychology. It's when you have a certain value or belief, and maybe you also hold another value or belief, or you're behaving in a certain way which is not in accordance with this value or belief that you've espoused or you're stating. And so you get this kind of uncomfortable feeling. Some might call it your conscience, or your call, within to integrity. And so, the more that we judge other people and say, oh, they're bad or they're wrong, and then we, talk smack about them or whatever, that creates this atmosphere of judgment, which then gets turned on us when it's our turn to learn a lesson. And so what I'm, inviting everyone here is to understand that if you learn not to talk smack about anyone, and rather just have a certain level of understanding or compassion for them as just being whoever it is that they are, then you will have more maybe compassion and forgiveness for yourself when you eventually are faced with an inconsistency, which then, if you are not burdened by this judgment, you might just be able to say, oh, I say that I value this, but then I acted that way. And then you can maybe learn from that and go, oh, you know what, I think that either A, I should change this value that I have, because actually when I do this, it feels really good, and and actually it doesn't hurt anyone. This value that I've been espousing, maybe it's something that I learned from my culture, and it's something that I was taught is good or bad or whatever. And so, maybe I want to change that value. Or you might decide, well, actually, that value is really important to me. And when I think about it clearly, I want to keep that value, and I want to be in alignment and integrity with that value. So I need to change my behavior. And that's how we grow and we learn and we change the way that we're behaving. If not changing ourselves inherently, we're changing the way that we are behaving in the world. And therefore, the way that other people experience us is going to be different. And the results and accomplishments and achievements that we can attain in our lives are going to change because of the way that we are coming into alignment with our values. And so, I wanted to share this, to help people kind of gain this ability to learn more, release their judgment. But I also want to make sure that I express that it's very important to keep discernment. It doesn't just mean when you say, oh, I'm not going to call anybody bad or wrong. It doesn't mean that you don't want to recognize when they're being incredibly selfish, for example. You do want to be able to recognize that another person just keep speaking or acting in ways which really serve them and really don't serve anyone around them or anything around them. And they're just oriented towards themselves and satisfying themselves and fulfilling their own needs or their own wants, even beyond need. And the encouragement here is just to know that maybe you want to put that person in a certain relationship to you, not very close to you, perhaps, or close to your loved ones, because they tend to take and take rather than being in a more symbiotic relationship where you're going back and forth and you're exchanging energy with people and exchanging value. So, or even in a more severe kind of circumstance, a person is a violent person. You maybe just don't want them in your life at all. But let's say it's a little bit on a lesser, scale. Let's say that they're acting in, selfish ways. Maybe even in a specific context, they act in selfish ways. Maybe generally they're very, very kind and good, and you appreciate them. But sometimes in this certain situation, they're kind of being that way. Well, if you really value their friendship and you think that on the whole they are a good person and they wouldn't want to do those things if they only knew that that's how they were acting or how other people were experiencing them, then you might approach them with that discernment and offer to them that they are acting that way in your experience, that you observe them acting this way. Now, a way to convey your thoughts and needs about another and their behavior that's really, really powerful is called nonviolent communication. It was established by a guy named Marshall Rosenberg, an incredible individual who, helped gang members and police come to an accord and helped Palestinians and Israelis come to an accord despite their vast differences, because they could come to understand the similarities between them, which is what I was pointing out kind of with this whole video, that we are all kind of in the same boat as human beings. And if we can have a little bit more compassion and understanding for one another, maybe a lot of the relationships that we have might actually benefit tremendously, and we ourselves might grow through them and benefit tremendously. But that discernment, along with that compassion, is incredibly important, because you do want to protect yourself. You do want to love yourself enough to make sure that you're not being taken advantage of by certain people. And that's kind of where the fulcrum lies around, how do we act in a way that's really ecologically aware of our connection with all things. If we're really connected to everything and all the other people in our environment are just really part of us, they're part of this one field of being interacting with itself, then how do I negotiate when a person is acting in a way that is directly against my interests and still at the same time recognize that they're part of me? And really what, to me, it comes down to is that we are learning to love ourselves enough to say no to that person. And maybe saying no to that person is exactly what they need to hear. They need to understand, oh, that way of behaving doesn't work for me. It's going to drive people that maybe I love or appreciate away from me. And so no could be the kindest thing that they ever heard, or breaking off a relationship could be the best thing that ever happened for them, because then they have the opportunity at least to say, oh, that was painful. Maybe I'll reflect now on why it is that that happened, and perhaps they will have an opportunity to recognize that they played some part of it. And if you're very honest with the person, and if you come to them in a very, respectful way and say, hey, I just, instead of ghosting on them or whatever, you say, hey, I just want to be totally honest with you, like these experiences I've had with you are this and that, and, such and such so forth happened, and this is how I felt about it, and I feel that way because I value, a respectful relationship, and so my request is that you stay away from me, then that person will have a chance to learn. Now, of course, you also don't necessarily owe it to every person who, causes you a lot of discomfort to chase them down and explain to them, why it is that you don't want to see them anymore. Sometimes it is appropriate to just allow things to drift away. But I'm just here to offer a perspective on how it is that we're all actually the same, and how it is that we might look at things with more discernment and less judgment, both for the benefit of everyone around us and for our own benefit as well. So I hope you've gained something by watching this video. Much love and many blessings.